Welcome to the Community Spotlight Podcast. My guest today is Dr. Jeffrey Hartmann. He's the superintendent of the Galion City Schools. Welcome back, Dr. Hartmann.
Hi, good morning.
Good to see you. I know you got a whole, 9 weeks in already over there?
Yeah, a whole 9 weeks. It's gone by in a flash.
I would take it that the beginning of this, the school years, went fairly well for you all?
Yes. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun getting to know the kids, getting to know the community, getting to know our adults. They've welcomed me with open arms. They've been very gracious, accepting an outsider. But I'm quickly learning all the ins and outs of our community.
Well, that's key in any position. You have to learn. It's like being on a different team. If you go get traded to another team, you better learn what the team is like, the culture of the team,
Absolutely.
The local norms, whatever. I know before we went on to pre-record this morning, I'd ask you, I said, are you originally from Pennsylvania, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, now, and you actually were schooled in Pennsylvania, correct? I mean, that's where you attended most of your college. Our listeners probably don't know a whole lot about you, so if anything you'd like to share, in small towns, they just love to know about everybody.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, Mom and Dad, they weren't college educated, so it was really important for me and my two younger sisters to have that experience. Dad was a steel worker and Mom was an office manager, so I did my undergrad at Slippery Rock, which was in Western PA. So, Ohio is not foreign territory for our family. We'd go shopping in Boardman and Youngstown and kind of that area. And then I did all my graduate work at the University of Pittsburgh. So, it was the education piece was important for our family in whatever direction that took us. It took us in the college direction, but my dad was in the trades and made a very good living for us and was able to support his family. And so there's a lot of pieces to that where in today's age, making a livable wage is important.
Yes.
Not everybody has to go to college. Just make sure that you're contributing to society positively.
Right, and it's a matter of finding, I always say, the niche or where you need to be.
Yes.
And that's not always where everybody else thinks you ought to be.
That's right.
There's this thing I call discovery. It's the great thing of life that if we can kind of discover, it's very helpful. It's interesting. So basically, you're kind of from the western Pennsylvania, western part of Pennsylvania. Now, I'll share you something from my family's history just for fun, but my grandfather, when he came over here from the old country, which would be Sicily and them, when they came over, one of the stops that they made along the way, and they spent some time in McKeesport, and he worked in the steel mills. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're right. The work ethic was different. So many things are so different. I'm going to be 70 years old. And I remember grandfather and the people back, so I understand this. And things change with time, and as we just mentioned, that also used to be kind of when I was younger. It's like, well, you had to go to college to succeed. That's not necessarily the case anymore.
No, not at all. Not at all. Especially in this region where agriculture is so important and is such a big business. There's more and more inroads of technology that just the technology for fixing a combine is just light years away from what it was years ago. And so whether our students are going to college or whether they're going into the trades, whether they're going to work on a GPS guided combine or whether they're going to be using computer chipped hogs in a farm somewhere. I mean, all of those are skills that are here today that weren't here 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. So the challenge for all schools, how do you prepare kids for that uncertain future? But there's a ton of available opportunities locally, and making sure that our kids know that's really important.
Well, absolutely, because a lot of in the community, a lot of things have been, well, we raise kids here and then they move to XYZ city, and then
Right.
they're never heard from again. Kind of like the
Right.
whaler that went to sea.
Yeah.
You don't see him anymore.
Right.
But if sometimes I don't think people know what's right in their own backyard, and there's many things like you said, skilled trades. You can go get a 2-year degree. There's many things you can get a certificate program now because they're really because of the lack of employees. They need to get people up and in the workforce quicker.
Right.
And so this is a lot more nimble, and education needs to become more nimble with it. And I think sometimes that's been kind of a struggle because back in the day, everything was you go to school for 4 years, your first 2 years, you basically take your basic requirements, blah, 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 and then you get this, quote, well-rounded education. Well, now we're kind of more fast-tracked to this. No, these are the specific things that you might want to look at.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that it's important. I think for listeners to know, especially listeners that have kids. At Galion, we have a specific program that allows for students to leave high school with a legitimate associate's degree from North Central. A lot of schools in the area offer College Credit Plus, which is
Yes.
you can kind of take college courses that count for high school classes. But Galion's program is unique. We have the College Credit Plus plan, but then we have a more defined, articulated plan where you end up graduating high school with an associate's degree and a high school diploma, and not a lot of places have that.
No, they don't.
So one of the things to answer your earlier question that's really been impressive, the number of kind of hidden secrets that the Galion City Schools has that a lot of people don't know about, partly because they're not educators, and that's okay. But the other part of programs like this, where it's the Galion Early College Academy, we call it GECA, allows for that kind of an opportunity for kids that may be first generation college kids themselves. Maybe they're moving into the trades, but having that 2-year degree is important for career progression or advancement when they go into some sort of industry related field. But it's been really impressive to see the different things that our educators are doing to help prepare our kids. I've worked in a couple of different states. I've been around to different schools and school districts, and Galion's doing some really cool stuff that a lot of places aren't doing. And I think as kind of recognition for that, our preschool program has been nominated for a visit from the governor, simply because of the growth that our kids are making and some of the practices that our teachers are using. So, you come to Galion, you're going to get a good value, a good bang for your buck, and you just got to have those experiences to move kids forward, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Well, the Galion school system has done a lot of innovation over the years.
Yes.
And like you say, sometimes it's kind of the best kept secret because it's only seemed like people in Galion knew about it.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get the word out that, through through the podcast and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we highly promote education on this on the podcast.
Sure.
And anyhow, that's great. Now, I know this is a big thing around here is these district report cards.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Where are we at on that with? I know, don't they come out in early October?
Yeah, they came out, I think it was late September, actually.
Okay.
So our district report cards remained pretty stable. We went down in a couple of areas, and they have the star system. So,
yes, they went to the star system.
4 stars to 3, or we went from, in some cases, 3 stars to 4. But there weren't any large swings that took us by surprise. The thing that I think is important for all of our listeners to know is, our comparison, and we were just talking to a group of teachers yesterday about this. We compare Galion City Schools to our contiguous school districts. So, we compare to Colonel Crawford, we compare to Northmore or Ontario or Crestline. None of those schools are the same in almost any way, shape, or form. Yeah. And it very much is an unfair comparison. Galion's free and reduced lunch population's in the 60% range. Colonel Crawford, for example, is in the 20% range. So, when you have a difference in socioeconomics, it's going to have a difference in performance. really, according to the state, our number one, our number two comparison school district is really Conneaut school district when you look in terms of population and economic disadvantage. And when you look at their report card and you compare us, we're way further ahead.
Yeah.
So I think that's important for a lot of people to realize that, because of the industry downturn in the last couple of decades, Galion's dealing with differences and challenges that many of our other area districts don't have to deal with.
It's much very similar, kind of like to Bucyrus, and I had Bucyrus superintendent on here recently, and I always said it's comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. I said each district is very unique in the way things are. So, and just like here, you have a lot of, like Bucyrus, we have a number of socioeconomic group. What I want to say, I can't even think of how I'm trying to say this. My mind kind of leaving here, but there's differences in the bottom line is you have to service the population that's in your district.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I say that's the hand you're dealt, and you do the best you can with what you've been dealt. Yeah. But when you hear somebody say, "Well, this district is great," it's not. I'm not putting down districts that are good, and I'm not making excuses for the districts that maybe it isn't up to it. All I'm just saying is, I think what you're trying to say, and what I would say as well, you got to know what you're comparing, and in fairness, that's the key to it.
Right.
And are you advancing, or are you making a progression from that? So I'm glad we had that we got off into that discussion, because I think that's a great thing to know, and that's something that needs to be emphasized.
Absolutely.
Because just comparing, as it's like the old saying, compared to what? You got to know what you're comparing to.
Yeah.
Now I talked about something I was reading about, this infusion of problem-based learning. That sounds like a fancy title. What does that mean?
That is, project-based learning is nothing more than, taking what is abstract and making it real in front of you. So project-based learning is everything that happens in art class, everything that happens in music class, everything that happens in a career and technical education class. So, when you talk to kids, and you kind of ask them, well, why do you like going to art class? Why do you like going to? Their answer is because they're doing something with the material, instead of just sitting and kind of passively learning English or passively learning math. How do you take math and turn that into a project? How do you take the content for social studies and turn that into a project? Right now in the middle school, they're doing an elections. They have different kids running for different offices, and I think on one day this week they're going to be asking about having a political convention and different platforms like that. That's all project based. And how do you take the theory and turn it into something that's kind of relevant for kids? I think back to my woodshop classes that I took, and it was super cool because you made something out of it. It wasn't just, here, let's learn geometry. Let's learn geometry and then apply it, because you need to cut this piece of wood at a certain angle to do X, Y, Z with it. So that's what that comes into.
Well, the reason why I mentioned that is because I always say I call it the light goes on. It's like you're going here and you say, well, I really don't need to know math. Then you start finding out these various things I need to know that are mathematically related to this activity I'm doing, or if I'm producing a piece of woodwork, yes, I need to know measurements. I need to know a lot of angles. Now I can see the relevance to what I'm learning, and if you can get something to people that they can relate to, they're more likely to retain that material and also see relevance. And once you do that, you tend to take some ownership of that, don't you?
Absolutely. One of the things that that also drives home is, this has been a shift, a kind of thought process shift for a lot of our staff and teachers kind of writ large. We teach kids. We may use math to reach that kid and develop a relationship. We may use social studies. We may use woodshop. We may use art class. But at the end of the day, it's about developing relationships with kids. And when we interview people, I'm looking for a potential candidate to tell me that they teach kids, they don't teach content. Especially if we go back to, the demographic that we have in Galion. When you have certain challenges with different socioeconomic groups, it means that you need to meet those kids where they're at. Mom and dad aren't keeping their best and brightest at home sometimes. They're sending us what they got. And we need to meet the kids where they're at. And then we use all of the tools in the toolbox: math, social studies, science, woodshop, project-based learning, career in tech. We use all of the tools to be able to reach that kid and develop a relationship with that kid, because, it's all about hope. And educators are dealers in hope. And use all the tools in order to give that kid some hope that they're able to change their trajectory and have themselves a better future. And that takes a more intentional effort when you're dealing with a higher free and reduced lunch population than you have in area districts that aren't challenged with those dynamics as much.
Well, it's called, a word called adjustment.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they're used to doing something a certain way. This is the way we've always done it. But quite frankly, we are finding it's not working. So guess what? You need to make an adjustment to the needs of the students and to the needs of the current society that we're in. Because it's I'm sorry, folks, this isn't Leave It to Beaver. That's been a long time ago. These old type things when I was in the 50s. I mean, that's gone. That era is gone. So you have to face reality at some point and say, this is where we're at. What do we do to make the adjustments? It's really, that's what education a lot should be about. It's making those adjustments. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes, some acknowledgement, because, change is hard.
Sure.
And I think everybody would acknowledge that and agree with that. But it doesn't mean that just because it's hard, we shouldn't do it.
Absolutely.
One of the things that little sayings that I've seen around the district in different offices is, together we can do hard things.
Yes.
And that's so true, because, when you're faced with that challenge, it's just easy to throw your hands up. And for a lot of our teachers, there are some of the staff that still go back to the days before we consolidated onto one campus, and they still kind of wish for the days where we still had this school or we still had that school. The reality is that's never going to happen again.
Well, that's in the Smithsonian Institute.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry, but it's like horseshoes before car. That was a good trade. I guess it still is, because there's probably so few of them anymore. They do for shoeing horses. But the fact of the matter is, we went on to automobiles, so you had to make these adjustments. And this is a constant thing, and especially with all this new technology and very many things, there's going to be more and more adjustments as life goes on.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I think we end up acknowledging that, but I think we work with those teachers, and we have a large degree of empathy and grace with the fact that some of that's really hard, and their world has kind of changed before their eyes. Sometimes they know what to do about it, sometimes they don't. Doesn't mean we need to be mean and grumpy about the change. It's not like change or else. But helping and supporting those folks along the way to make sure that we're doing the best thing we can for kids.
And I think also part of this is sometimes people, they think, well, it has to be this way because it worked then. Well, stop and think about I always go to this. That doesn't mean you throw these things out. It just means you make adaptation to the current circumstances. Like, you still have to read. You still have all these fundamental things that have to be done. And those are never going to be, quote, go out of style. They will always be, and you have to have these as a base. And so people aren't just saying today you need to just throw this stuff out. That's not what we're talking about here. We're just saying making those things need to be a part of what the final package is, just like they've always been, because you have to know the ABCs before you can get into read and all these other various things. Everything builds precept upon precept, doesn't it? All right. Anything else today that maybe we might want to discuss, or did we kind of get off into some things? Maybe.
I think when we were just kind of talking about the listening aspect and how important that is whenever we're engaging in the change process, and allowing people to kind of share their thinking and share their thoughts. One of the things that I think might be important for listeners to know, the first Wednesday of every month, I'll be at K&B Laundromat. I'll be in the corner, and I'll have a little carafe of coffee, and we can just do coffee and conversation, because I really want to know what the community thinks. And, I think having that opportunity in a non-school building allows for a little bit more kind of freedom maybe there are people that didn't have a good experience in school, and I feel bad about that. So I don't want to have a conversation in a school building. I want them to feel, open and comfortable. So we'll have a conversation at the laundromat.
There you go.
K&B Laundromat, 5 o'clock, first Wednesday every month. I'll be sitting there, and if people want to come and have a conversation, I'll be there for an hour, and
There you go. We'll talk. Well, Dr. Jeffrey Hartmann, I want to thank you for being the guest today on the podcast. This has been very insightful, and we've had a wonderful conversation here. Looking forward to more conversations.
Likewise.
Great things going on in the Galion City School District, and like I say, the word needs to get out, and that's what we're doing through these podcasts. So thank us again for come over and sharing your time and
Absolutely.
being so open with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You're more than welcome.